Hey, David T.S. Wood here, and welcome to My Extra Mile. Our comment winner today is Brendan D. He said, "What an engaging show, Dave. The rant was like a nice massage. Enjoyed every moment of it. Also, great views on the drive. I was recording as I was driving." He said, "I've described to your YouTube channel and will be tuning in." Thanks, Brendan. Love it. And our show today, what can I say? This is an old friend of mine, brilliant, funny, wise, and successful. And, you know, we get into it. We get into the heart of how we both moved our life from where it was to where we want to be and where we are today, the success that we enjoy. It's deep, it's personal, and there are so many real gems in this and so deeply honest. So enjoy the incredible, well, before I say who it is, don't forget, subscribe. And you know what? Push the notification button. That way you'll know when the shows drop. You'll get them right away. And also the like button helps. And of course, get involved with the conversation. And enjoy my beautiful friend, the incredible Zach Slobin.
I love it. I love it when we start a recording and we're laughing, because right now the first thing everyone's seeing is you and me giggling. They have no idea what we're laughing at, but it's my inept ability so we start talking and I haven't even pushed record. So then I said, hold on, let's try this one more time. Let me push record. So then we start laughing. So Zach, I was just, you and I were joking a little bit ago, just to say, we really have so much love and respect and friendship, and yet we don't hang out a lot. And now, the fact that we get to do this almost in a public domain, it's almost like we got to catch up. And so, we really don't, what I love about who you are and how you are is there is no plan yet for where we're going to go today. And I think that really suits who we both are in the world today, is that sort of openness to discover where this conversation is going to go. How do you feel about that?
I feel like that's kind of, I think that's just kind of how I've lived my life. I think I was always just willing to explore and kind of find out what was next. I just never really subscribed to like the rudimentary way of living. That's why I've always been so inspired by your story. And I think I resonated and was so attracted to you in the beginning, just how you left home so early and lived all over the world. And you were just willing to say yes and kind of figure out the rest. And so I just found that when I gave up trying to control my life was when I kind of gained complete control of my life, ironically.
And we almost have to say that again for someone who just heard that, when I gave up trying to control my life is when I really started to control my life, because it wasn't that long ago. I don't even know how many years ago was it. How long have you been a professional network marketer? Oh, so not say professional. How long has it been since you sort of stepped away from what would be more conventional to more the unconventional? How long's that been?
It's about 7.5 years now.
And we knew each other. I mean, we got to know each other in those early days a lot. And I suppose one thing, when I watched the journey over these last few years, and I see almost like a compound effect of your personal, and I'm going to use this word, I don't like the word, a personal brand. I mean, who you are as a human being and how you show up and the impact you're having. But if you sort of go back before you sort of cross the line, before you were bold enough to make a change, can you just give me a kind of a picture again? I remember, but people listening have no idea. What was life like if you had to sort of sum your life up before you started to really have the courage to step out of ordinary and sort of step towards, I would consider your life to be extraordinary. Although this should be normal. I mean, the way we live and the way we think should be everyone. I mean, it should be normal for everyone, but give us a little peek into what your thoughts were back then and how you were sort of, how you were showing up in the world.
Yeah, I think it gets summed up by a comment that a facilitator in a personal development workshop said to me one day. He put me in front of the room, and it was in front of like 100 people. And he said, "Zach," he said, "my experience of you is that you're more concerned with looking rich than you are with being rich." And it was probably one of the most important things anyone's ever said to me in my life, because it really kind of slapped the stupid out of me, if you will, in terms of what I was consumed by. And what I was really consumed by was just this obsession and need for other people's validation. I sought worthiness in so many different ways, and I abused myself in the process, and I abused others in the process, quite frankly. And that's what life was like. It was a complete yearning for look at me, look at me, look at me, praise me, love me, acknowledge me, recognize me, because I really believed, due to early programming and stuff, that I had to earn love. And that's what most of my formative years were spent doing, was a variety of things as a way to hopefully get people to love me.
But do you see that, or do you notice how many people are kind of trapped? Because as you've sort of, moved through that, I think a couple of things happen. One is your empathy and compassion and understanding and experience allows yourself sometimes to notice in others where you were. Do you notice a lot of people trapped in that game of proving, if we call it proving, or sometimes they're sitting there with a like you said, the show is so not reflective of what the sort of innermost feelings are. It's almost like pulling, and even if we go back to your early statement, which was when you stop trying to control it, that's when you got control. But so many people are in the game of showing something that they're yearning for without realizing that when they stop that game is when they can really have what they're looking for, right?
Yeah, I think that I see it all the time, and I was the same way, so it's easy to recognize it in other people, of course, right? I think that there is this obsessiveness with who we think we're supposed to be versus who we truly are. And it's a terrifying predicament for a lot of people to question the nature of their own reality. And, well, if I'm not, who my parents thought I should be as a doctor or as a lawyer or as an accountant, and that's just in a career space, of course, or even if I'm, even if I feel like I have different tendencies, as a human, or different political beliefs or value systems or whatever, then who am I? If I don't identify as who I was taught to be, right? Who am I outside of that? And is it safe for me to live my life in that world? And I think that's a really terrifying proposition for a lot of people. The great irony of it, of course, is that's where ultimate freedom exists. So for me, the big thing I went to work on was moving myself from look at me to here I am. And that's, I think, if people could kind of start to have that conversation with themselves of moving from look at me to here I am, the joy that comes with living life in that way, at least for me personally, and I think you live a lot like that as well, it just makes life so much easier. It's just so much easier.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because that distinction is almost like, when we talk about some of this, it sounds so simple. The distinction between look at me and here I am. I mean, we're talking about, yeah, well, I'll just do that then. I'll just say, here I am. Yeah, it can be one of the hardest journeys. I mean, I know for me personally, I was the ultimate prover to the point, you could phone me. You've heard me say this before, but, someone will call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and I hear the phone ring and I'll go, hello, 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 hello. And it's like, did I wake you up? No, all good. It's like I'm afraid for someone to realize I actually sleep, or I go to someone's home, they use their bathroom. And most bathrooms, when you're a guest, are right off the kitchen, running the taps, pretending like I'm not peeing, all the crazy stuff that I used to do. And that would border into lying as well. And exaggerating, lying, just living in a world of what make-believe, but it was not make-believe where we think, oh, make-believe. It was make-believe in the sense of I was terrified for people to see the truth, thinking that I was the only one walking around doing this. Is that kind of how you felt a little bit?
100%. My mom, and I've talked about my mom for years, and she's a brilliant woman, and she's a very successful psychotherapist. And what she used to call it with me was she'd say, Zachy, you have this little kernel of grandiosity inside of you. It's just this nugget of grandiosity where you feel like you need to be bigger than everything and bigger than everybody, because if you're not, right, then no one's going to like you or love you or whatever it may be. So that's what she referred to it. So I know that inherently. And it's, I learned a lesson from you one time, and I remember exactly where we were. We had just finished a day on the ropes, doing a ropes course up in Kelowna. And somebody had asked me for something and my answer was no, but then I went on to start explaining why it was a no. And you just stopped me and you said, you don't have to explain why something's a no for you. And I remember going, oh, wow, I guess you're right. But there's so much of that people pleasing that says, well, I need to soften the blow. I need to make it okay. I need to make sure that I balance the books with this person, that they're not upset with me or I don't hurt their feelings or whatever it may be. And so, yeah, I think that I can totally relate to that. And I think that lying is the best term. I think lying is the best term. You know, we exaggerate for sure, but we lie to our friends, we lie to our family, but more than anything, of course, we lie to ourselves, you know, about who we think we need to be in the world.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, you know, I always say it took me 44 years to learn how to tell the truth. And I still hear lies in my head. I don't know about you, but, you know, situation comes up and I hear the bullshit going on through my head. And fortunately, I realize that what I'm thinking isn't necessarily, most times, if it's negative in any way or fear-based in any way, I realize it's just not me. It's all the old crap just coming back, and it just sort of lives there. And it's only in certain situations that the volume gets turned up. And, you know, so, I mean, I work on my mind, and I believe that, in fact, my trainer this morning, thank you, Zach, you see this? I always say the reason I live in such a healthy body is one conversation I had with you. You walked up to me and you said to me, I remember exactly what I was doing. I remember exactly where I was standing. And I was at an event and I was at the back table, and you walked up to me and you said, you know, if you could change any area of your life right now, what would it be? Or words to that effect. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And it was like, wow. And I looked at you and I said, my body. Because I realized that whole last summer, I hadn't taken my shirt off once on my boat when I had guests. I take it off when I was alone. And, you know, if a plane flew over, I'd put it, no, just kidding. But, you know, but that sort of moment of decision. And how many years ago was that? Was that 5 years? 6?
I remember we were in Atlanta, and it was my favorite question. If you could create one breakthrough in any area of your life right now, what would it be? And you said your body and your health. And we were Atlanta. Yeah, it must have been 5 or 6 years ago already, at least.
Yeah. And ever since then, you know, I train 5 days a week with a trainer. And even when I'm on the road, and I'm, you know, like I'm 60 this year, and I just, I feel fitter and stronger, and everything about my physical body, I never mind taking my shirt off. I don't do it. I mean, I'm still not like, hey, look at me. That ain't going on. I didn't buy a Speedo yet or a thong. I mean, that hasn't happened yet, but I forgot where I was going, but I was having a conversation with my trainer this morning. What were we talking about? Because I knew I was going to get off track here.
I think I got caught up in the story as well. So
that's exactly a whoop, 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 whoop. All right. But yeah, I can't remember what it was either. But yeah, so going back to that, this sort of, you know, the lies that we tell ourselves, right. And that sort of, I just didn't know how many masks I owned. And I know this sounds like personal development bullshit, but I don't feel that way. I just feel like, you know, oh my gosh, you know, even with my family, I mean, especially with my family, I had a family mask. And what's happened since I buried that sucker, you know, our family, our gatherings are so honest and real, and there's no drama anywhere. And I realized that my mask was as a bigger contributor to our family drama as anything was the mask I was wearing, because it was always about my interpretation of what's happening. And now everyone shows up as they are. And it's so fun because we have the weirdest and most wonderful and crazy family, but my mask is no longer there. So I show up and it just feels real and honest. But when you talk about going from look at me to here I am, and this is really, I think, where our focus is going to stay, if I can remember, right, is talk about masks and talk about, you know, that idea. Maybe you don't use that term as much, but certainly I think a lot of people get it. Well, what's your understanding of, you know, why masks are there and how they're used by most people?
Yeah, I think I'm very familiar with that. And I think it's the right term. And I think that it's ironic that we're talking about it in this season. I think it's fascinating, actually. But I think that we, you know, in our early years, and I know you teach this as well, we experience some kind of a story. And at a very young age, we give meaning to a story that we have no real conscious interpretation of whatsoever. And then our unconscious mind goes to work on facilitating the living out and the projection of that story. You know, an example I use all the time is you might be a 4 or 5 year old little boy or little girl, and you say, hey, I want another cupcake. And your dad says, no, you can't have another cupcake. And instead of understanding that a parent might not want you to get a stomach ache because you ate too much sugar, you interpret that as, well, oh, dad thinks I'm fat. He must not love me. And now you spend the rest of your life seeking out experiences of not being lovable. And we project those out in all kinds of different ways. So for me, didn't have the cupcake experience. I had other experiences where I had convinced myself that I was dumb. That was my story, that I'm dumb. I'm just not smart enough. And so I wore a mask of extreme arrogance to project out the idea.
It's true. You were a bit of a dick when I met you. I just want to put that out there.
Probably a fair assessment. No,
I'm joking. Carry on.
only a little bit.
A little tiny.
It's probably a good thing we're not having drinks while we're doing this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I quit drinking alcohol. I haven't drunk alcohol. Yeah. I don't know why. I mean, it's been about, I don't know, 3.5 months or so, but I'm really enjoying it. I don't know what, because I grew up socially drinking, growing up in England, and, and I socialize a lot, our culture as well. I mean, lots of gatherings, lots of people, and every day I don't miss it, but I'm enjoying not having it in my body. And I know I'm going to drink again, but I just have no rush towards it. But it become just a habit that I just realized I was doing so much. And it was like, well, what would happen if I stopped doing it? And it's been great. And anyway, see, I'm taking him off track again. Go back to your conversation. Sorry.
No, but it's important because also I remember what you were talking about now before as well. So I think that when we ask ourselves the question, if I don't wear this mask, then what does it look like underneath, right? And am I willing to expose myself to the hardship and the journey that comes with the formation of a new identity? It's like Joseph Campbell talks about it, the hero's journey. And I think a lot of people are kind of scared to take that quest. And so they'll stay in a place of complacency, as uncomfortable as it is to stay in that space. They'll stay there because the ripping of the mask, and I speak from personal experience, and I think you do as well, of course, is remarkably painful. It is. It's painful. But ultimately, when you consider that kind of pain is what leads to the ultimate pleasure, it's just so very worth it. And then I was thinking about what you were saying before, and I know where we went off track is, you were talking about how you've done all this personal development and you still have these dark thoughts. And I know earlier in the year for me, and even when
I remember what I was saying about my trainer. Sorry, earlier in the year for you, I'll come back to you, but I want to make sure I finish that. I was telling my trainer, because we were talking about one of my kids, and he's starting a 90-day challenge, and I'm like, and my trainer was sort of asking me, is like, well, you're always so positive. I said, well, to be honest with you, I said, when I get out of bed, like this morning, we had an early workout. I said, I didn't feel like doing it. I said, but I have this trigger when I walk in my shower. As soon as that water hits my body, I know when I leave it, I'm going to be 100% who I'm going to be all day. So I give myself permission to kind of like drag my sorry ass. And if there's any negativity in my body, it's going to be there from the walk from my bed to the shower. But when I'm in there, when I walk out, I decide how I want to be. And it's so interesting because I go to it today on Fridays, I'm at my home gym, but the rest of the week I go to this gym where a lot of professional athletes, a lot of high level athletes. And I realize that I'm probably the only person that knows everybody. And because I make it a point to walk up, and there's people who are famous in there, but not just those. I'm talking about people who aren't young athletes. But I'm there every day, and normally around that time you see lots of different people. But I know their stories now. I connect with them. I hug them, and I'm the weirdo that walks in with this smile on my face. And I figured if they could see me from when their alarm goes off to when I go in that shower before I go to the gym, they're like, oh my God, what a grumpy bastard. But then because I just have this trigger, so I never go out without a shower. Not that I'm grumpy, I mean, rarely. But the conditioning I have to do is a choice that I make every morning of how I want to live the rest of the day. And then if I do get off track slightly, there's one sign up in my house. It's right here. It says, it's never too late to start the day over. It's right there in my kitchen, right there on the top there. If you look, right? Boop, right there. Right? So I don't know where I was going with that, but it really was for me as a choice. I still have to choose to be maskless. it's not that I take it for granted that I just got rid of them and they're always gone. I hear the freaking things and I feel them sort of like, you know, remember that the movie with Jim Carrey with the mask?
Yeah.
Like that. I can see it wanting to stick to my face, right? And when that mask is on, what I love about that movie, it's such a great movie, is like it brings out who you really, your deepest thoughts. So how, when you wear the mask, the one guy's a real dick and Jim's such a fun-loving, romantic. And it's kind of, isn't it true? When you're wearing if you're wearing a mask, you know, bring out that thought. So if you have fear-based thoughts, when you're wearing a mask, you live in a fear-based world. And, you know, when you don't have it, you kind of, your authentic self starts to emerge. But going back to what you were about to say, sorry.
But I think it's important that people hear that. So you've been doing personal development for years and years. You're a master facilitator and trainer. You facilitated tens of thousands of people. You've done all the work, read all the books, right? I've done quite a bit in my life, not as much as you have, of course. And I think it's important for people to hear that even at our quote unquote level, which I hate that term, right? But for conversation's sake, we still have the propensity to have thoughts creep in. And it's like people just, I wish people would understand that part of the work never really stops. They never really go away. I mean, earlier this year, I mean, I had some dark stuff come up, and I was sitting in my little chair, my reading chair, and I would just kind of be apathetic. And meanwhile, our business is growing through the roof. We have everything, you know, that we could possibly ask for. My wife's health is finally back to almost 100%. And yet here I am feeling mentally exhausted, and these thoughts start to come in, and it's kind of like, oh my God, what? We're still talking about that? You know what I mean? And I think it's important that people know that it just, you know, it kind of never ends. But that's why, you know, some people say, oh, personal development's bullshit, blah, blah, blah. No, it's the ability to recognize the thought that's coming in and going, wait a minute, that's not mine. That's just old stuff. And now, great, now that I've identified that thought, how do I want to respond? What action can I take right now? How can I change my physical and emotional state? What can I create right now to move out of that response, the same way that you get in the shower and it triggers something new for you in that decision to start your day whenever you want to. So I just think I think people, you know, people think that personal development is some sort of miracle cure. And it's far from it.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it can be addictive because when you're in there, you're feeling something that you haven't necessarily felt, but it's what you do when you leave. For me, I just like this, someone listening to this, it doesn't matter what you do and what realization happens. What would be really amazing is if one thing that you hear, you practice, and 3 months from now, you're like, holy crap. I remember that moment, like you, that conversation I talked about. You had asked me one question 5.5 years ago, which today I still think about every single time I walk in the gym. I think about you, and I'm grateful that, because I was in pain with my physical body that I hadn't even identified. And I was using excuses that I never realized, I didn't own them. It wasn't like I ever thought about them. They were just, oh yeah, I'm busy. Oh yeah, and there were all this shit going on. And I realized, no, none of that was true. I just hadn't made a choice or a decision to say, hey, what kind of body do I want to live in? And am I willing to do what it takes to get it, right? I do want to ask you a question though about, you know, because we're using what you said, which is look at me, look at me, look at me, to here I am. But a lot of other people don't have that look at me, look at me. Some of them are invisible. So, you know, people who are invisible will have no voice. A lot of women I work with, and probably 90% of my students are women, you know, they're not look at me, look at me, look at me necessarily. They're, you know, for God's sake, don't look at me, don't look at me, don't look at me. So they start to disappear, lose their voice, lose their visibility. So I just want us to sort of talk about, you know, we may use your example of look at me to here I am, but every single other person has different things. That same bridge is there. The here I am is still there, which is the outcome, but where they are and what they're going through may be slightly different. Do you want to touch on that so people can relate to what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think the reality is that we all project out our own fundamental misperceptions in a variety of different ways, right? So for me, I move towards arrogance and ego as a way of seeking validation. Other people, like you said, might move to a place of complete invisibility because that's how they're projecting out their conversation in their head that says they're not worthy of the right kind of love and attention and validation and things like that. And so that's how they project out, right? So I think the big question is, how can we, no matter what our fundamental misperception is or whatever stories we've told ourselves, how can we start to find new evidence in order to create a new story? That's the big question that we've got to ask ourselves, is where can we find new evidence? And I think you're right. I think that a lot of people's voices get silenced, but there's also a payoff in staying silent, right? There's the ego payoff that says, yes, stay silent. You don't deserve to talk, right? And so we make an agreement with that ego that says, you're right, I don't deserve to talk. That he's right for, disempowering me. She's right for, not giving me a voice. Like, see, it's true, I'm not worthy. My mom was right. Like,
Yeah.
we seek out evidence. And if we were just willing to start asking ourselves new questions along the lines of, like, what evidence do I have to support that I am worthy of having a voice? What evidence do I have to support that I am, capable of stepping into more of who I deserve to be in this world? We would find it. You find what you're looking for.
Yeah, I remember doing an exercise early on in my journey where, we sort of did a tabletop. And the tabletop was sort of, if you look at the table, we drew a tabletop, and the goal on there, let's say it was a financial goal, or it was a, whatever the goal was. And then what we had to do was create evidence by drawing the legs about who we really are in this moment, not who we want to be, but what evidence do we have? So we draw 4 legs and write on the legs the evidence to support the goal of where we're. And it was such a realization, because I never, at that point, I wasn't financially free, and I didn't have, complete freedom. I had the idea of it, but I was just starting out. And some of the and that's what I love about what you just said, asking ourselves a better set of questions, or putting myself into that. And when I started to identify, oh my gosh, I really do have what it takes to have that. It already exists inside of me. I just I couldn't see it, because I was so busy proving. I had so many freaking masks on. I didn't know who I was. I just was out there playing the game, trying to sort of, and I think what it really came down to for me was, I wanted people to like me. I was so like you. I was so searching for validation from the outside world that I would do anything or say anything in order to sort of receive that. But it was all non-conscious. I wasn't consciously saying, what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out this evening. I'm going to bullshit and lie just so people like me. It would never happen like that. It's just like I'd walk out and suddenly I'd find myself, and I wouldn't even, but by the way, over time, the lies became truth. I didn't know they were lies anymore, because I said them so often that I started to believe in myself. It was only when I went back and thought, holy crap. And then when I told the world I was a liar, I remember when I actually fessed up, it's like, it was almost like the wall came crumbling down with that honesty. It was like, holy crap, yeah, I've been lying my whole life. It was like, and not that I couldn't still hear them, but I no longer felt like I was trying to prove I wasn't. I was like, yeah, I really struggle with this. And that honesty allowed me to start to really cross the bridge. And that's what I want to come back to you with, is the bridge you cross from here I am to, oh, sorry, look at me, to here I am, or I'm invisible, here I am. But that level of truth to myself. And then once I vocalized it, it's almost like I put my first foot on the bridge.
Yeah, I think one of the ways I describe it is, when I describe the personal development journey, it's kind of like this 3-part phase. And the first part is awareness and acknowledgement, right? Acknowledging the ways in which I've contributed to the results that I have in my life right now. Like, what are the parts that I can take 100% responsibility for, right? And then the second part is reframing it, right? Like, how can I recontextualize what I actually experienced? Like, what did my mom mean when she said no more cupcakes? Like, am I willing to put myself in her shoes and have a new conversation, so I can go back and reframe and recolorize what I actually experienced during that event? And then can I, from there, once I recontextualize it, now I have all this space to create something new. And another metaphor I use for people all the time is I say, look, it's really these 3 parts. It's kind of like this. It's like you wake up one day and you're real groggy and you're lightheaded and you're looking around and you realize you're in some kind of a house, but you don't really recognize the house because there's spider webs on the walls, there's dirt on the floor, and you certainly can't see outside the window. It's pitch black because there's all kinds of just crap covering the window. Yet this house has this remarkable feeling of familiarity. And what you wake up to realize is, oh, wait, this is the house that I've allowed myself to live in for all these years, right? So that's kind of part 1, is this acknowledgement that actually this is my house.
Well, I remember your story. I think was your mom in the audience when you did that? You told a story when you didn't know my event, the amplified leadership, I think it was, but you did a keynote, and I think your mom was there. I remember, but you told a story, and I remember viscerally feeling the house you lived in, the house you just described. And for some reason, this is a lot of years ago, but laying on the couch, and almost like, it's not that you'd given up, but it felt like you were on the verge of giving up. Was that, am I remembering this right? I mean, I know a lot of stories of people, but I just can viscerally feel what you're talking about there.
Yeah, you're dead accurate. I was in a place in my life where I had been previously engaged to a woman I was with for like 4 years. We called off our wedding like 2 weeks after the save the date. Invites had gone out. We'd blown through all of our money. We were dead broke. I'd been lying to my parents for years about my financial position, things like that. I even when we called off the wedding, my mom gave me what she was going to spend on the wedding. She just gave it to me to like kind of rebuild my life. And I even lied to her about using some of that money to fly back to Utah to go to a second part of a personal development workshop I was a part of, right? So I lied to her. I was like, oh, I'm working on an ebook and I'm trying to sell it to people out there. And she called me and she goes, where are you? I was like, I'm in Utah. I told you. She goes, yeah, but what are you doing there? She caught me. So even in that moment, I was lying. And so when I came home from that trip, it got really, really dark. And so the part you remember from that talk is true. I spent months and months on that couch really evaluating two primary questions. The first question was, what would be the least painful way for me to kill myself? And what would be the least painful way for my mom to find me? Those were the two things that consumed my thoughts for months and months and months at that time. So yeah, that was easily the darkest part of my life.
Yeah, I got goosebumps there. It's funny how, again, we how we ended up on this couch, because really, if you think about, you'd reached that point in time, which I think a lot of us reach, and where that moment of choice, because, you knew the next step was fulfilling that, because you spent months thinking about this. It wasn't like a fleeting thought. I mean, sometimes people have a fleeting thought about what would the world do if I wasn't here, but you had really started to think this is the only way out. What was that moment? You say awareness is that key. And I totally agree. When I'm talking about, real change, and I love the idea about real change, and real change is when we look at the results, not, I'm feeling better. It's like, what's happening? What's different? What's the evidence to support that real change is occurring? But what was the moment, or what was some of the things that occurred for you to sort of start to take that responsibility? You said awareness that brings out that 100% responsibility. And then, you were able to start making those steps towards the life you lead today, which, again, those that don't know you, I know a lot of people who listen do know you, but I think, you have tremendous impact with your insights, your wisdom, your humor. But because of your journey, I think you share it in such an elegant and beautiful way that people grasp that they can do it too. It's not like, you're up here and they're like, it truly feels like, hey, I get it. And so here's the absolute truth, and here's the path. And guess what? And you support people. You're saying every single day during COVID, you've done a coaching call every single morning, which is what I mean, is that you're offering and giving and serving in a way. But talk about that really first step, because there's people listening right now who are feeling, not maybe about ending their life, but feel like they're on that couch and they're just seeing or feeling despair.
I stopped fighting to be right, and I started listening to other people's observations of how I was showing up in my life. For so long, I had defended my business choices, my relationship choices, my drug choices, and I made it all okay through lying, right? And at the point where I was on my mom's couch, my mom literally said to me, are you ready to shut up and listen? Are you ready to shut up and listen? Are you really willing to understand how you got to this point? And I said, finally, yeah, I'm ready. And the moment that got me to realize it was actually a humorous moment, it was actually hilarious. My mom was having a dinner party, and she goes, hey, listen, I'm having friends over for dinner. You're more than welcome to join us. Everyone would love to see you. These are people who they'd known me since I was a little kid. The last thing I wanted to do was them to see, 27-year-old, 28-year-old little Zachy grow up living on his mom's couch dead broke. So I was like, no, I'll go see a movie. Well, I remember the movie. It was Date Night with Steve Carell. And I get there, and this was before you could reserve your own, this is when you'd reserve your own seat. And I get there, and all the seats are taken except one seat is available, and it's in the very front row. Okay. So the whole theater, according to the computer, is packed. So I say, okay, I'll go in the front row. And I figured there will be some attrition. I'll just move back and be more comfortable. Well, the lights go down. I start looking around. I start looking everywhere. And there are no empty seats except for one seat. There's one available seat in the entire theater. And you know where it is?
Where?
Right next to me. Empty. Empty. And right next to me. And I'm sitting there laughing hysterically at at the humor and the tragedy of the gods in my life at this point, you know? And that was a big moment for me because I looked at it and I said, I just understood the symbolism of the emptiness that was there, right? That missing component, the part of me that wasn't willing just to be with myself. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people struggle with is the willingness just to take that solo journey of learning who we are at such an intimate level. And so that was a big part of it. And then I just started listening to my mom, and I started listening to my stepsisters sister-in-law, excuse me, and my brother, who, you know, they knew me better than anybody. And they said, look, we just want you to be Zach. You don't need to impress us. We just want you to be an uncle. We want you to be a brother. We want you to be a son. Like, we believe in you. We know that you have big aspirations. One day, maybe you'll get back to those things. But Zach, like, you got to stop trying to be all things to all people, because we just love you. And what I then found out, which was fascinating through doing some deeper work, was one of the reasons I kind of sabotaged my experience and, you know, ran out of money and the whole thing was I unconsciously had developed the question in my mind of, will people love me if I don't have money? And it was a big one for me. It was a big, oh wow. And so those were some of the critical points. And then my mom, every morning, my mom is just such, obviously you hear me speak about her in such, you know, revere, because she just taught me, you know, she would come in the morning, she'd say, look, she goes, just put one foot in front of the other. Like, what can you control today? What can you control today? She goes, I know you're miserable. I know you're sad. I know you're scared. Like, I know you're ashamed. Like, what can you control today? She said, go to the gym, go work out. She said, for 2 hours, just put on your headphones and just go bang out some weights and just control that, you know? And then the other thing she said to me that was huge was, and this was after a couple months where she kind of like just leaned into me a little bit harder. And she said, look, she goes, Zach, the world doesn't care. Everyone's got their stuff. Everybody. The world's not going to stop just because you're on the couch. Like, the world's not going to stop moving for you. She said, so you got to get up and you got to suit up and boot up, you know, and it's time for you to start, you know, putting in some extra work on yourself. And those were some of the moments where just clarity came to me, and it was just a kind of a, you know, slap across the face. But I had people in my life that cared enough about me to be honest with me.
Yeah. It's interesting because my point of transformation, let's call it that, happened when a girl came up to me and just told me the truth. And, you know, I've been backpacking for 10 and a half years, you know, and every time anyone got too close, you know, I love that. I could reel them in, but then I'd be gone because I didn't want to get hurt anymore. So, you know, I'd play that game, you know, I'd seduce someone and I'm out of here. And she just had the wisdom to share with me about me just going and facing this. She said, you know, if you don't face this, you know, you're going to be running your whole life. And I never felt like it was, you know, I always make, and even when I share my story, I make it sound like I was running to something, but really I was running away from something. Now, it turned out to be the most incredible 10 and a half years traveling around the world, but it was still avoiding the deeper pain. And I was still wearing these masks, you know, and because I was always a stranger and I could wander into situations, they could only get to know what I told them. So my story, I was always in control of the narrative. I was always like, you know, this is what I'd done. And so if I embellished any of the past, you know, I could make myself, you know, I could be whatever I wanted, right? In fact, in Israel, they hated the British because the British were always drinking too much. So I pretended to be Australian. In fact, a lot of people think, oh, that's where a lot of people hear an Australian accent in me. Well, I pretended to be Australian, mate. I was from Melbourne, Australia, you know, because I could be whatever I wanted, you know. So if I wanted love, I could just change. I was like a chameleon. But what she did is she asked me, she just said, why don't you just go back and talk to your family? And she gave me this idea, which I never had, was just go and tell the truth, how you're feeling. And I never, ever told the truth. So the idea of telling the truth to people who I was, you know, basically, I mean, I use the word hate, and I don't even like that word. Sure. But she told me something again, which really helped, which was the idea that she said, you know, and if you share with them the truth, don't expect them to apologize. Don't expect them to say you're right. Don't expect any kind of acknowledgement of any of that. Just do it for you. And that's the old saying you've heard me say a lot on stage, which is, you know, it's like holding on to hatred or anger or any dark energies, like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And I had drunk a lot of poison and I was carrying this shit around with me. And so when I went back, exactly what she said happened. There was no acknowledgement. There was no apology. There was no nothing. But luckily I knew about it. So when I came back, and something happened, Zach, I think I've shared this with you personally, but it's going to sound very woo-woo and very out there. But I was so, there was so much crap that I was carrying, and the masks were kind of avoiding all of that, that when I got back and I sort of told the truth, and I went there to forgive, not just them, but me, and to sort of let go. It was almost like I was holding on tightly to this idea that the world is suddenly going to change, you know, and I realized that, you know, I wasn't willing to change, but I wanted everyone else to change. And until they change, I'm going to, you know, I was holding on to this. But when I got back, I felt, you know, I mean, you know this about me, I never get sick. I was sick to the point, it was like all this stuff came, and I couldn't move. It was just stuff coming out of my body. It's like everything I held on to. And that for me was the biggest, like a huge step for me, was actually just that idea of letting go and then forgiving, and especially myself, and understanding that it's my imperfection that I started to fall in love with, not the perfection that I was constantly seeking. It was that imperfection of who I am in every moment and how I screw up, like how we started the call. We're laughing at the fact I couldn't use the computer. And now I just roll with it. But in the old days, I would have felt embarrassed. And I would have like, you know, I would have tried to justify, oh yeah, there's something wrong with the machine, as opposed to, oh yeah, I'm just inept, right?
I think that what you just said is ultimately the foundation of the bridge. When we talk about the bridge that we've been talking about, no matter, I think, look, I think people hear my story, they hear your story. In a lot of ways, they can't relate to the risks that we've taken in our lives and things like that. I understand. But they can relate to the emotional part. So, but I think what you said was so key, and that's the forgiving of ourselves part. I think when we can take ownership of who we've been and not justify it, but really just forgive ourselves for abusing ourselves, forgive ourselves for lying to ourselves, forgive ourselves for hurting, you know, for hurting other people, forgive ourselves for feeling that we had to live as somebody else. I think every time we forgive ourselves in some way, shape, or form, we lay down another plank across that bridge, you know, regardless of people's, you know, acceptance or unacceptance of that, you know, forgiveness. I've certainly had conversations in my life where I've gone to, you know, kind of, you know, ask forgiveness or whatever, and it wasn't necessarily accepted. But for me, the energetic cleansing that it did and the release of that stored trauma, which it sounds like was coming out of you in buckets, you know, that
buckets is a good description.
Actual buckets, right? So I think that our ability to forgive ourselves and to forgive other people for the roles that we think that they played in our lives, and I think that keyword "think" is a big one as well. I think that's ground zero, you know, for the process.
Yeah, thoughts, man. I mean, it's really interesting to think, and that's why I do so much work about the brain. I mean, like, and I've really got to a point, and I want to come back. Remind me about the planks. You used an analogy just there about the planks. I think that's such a perfect way for us to really focus on that bridge building, is that there was no rush to build the bridge. It's not like I needed to be across the bridge just with that first forgiveness. The journey across that bridge has been the most beautiful part of my entire life, because it was with awareness. So for the first time, I was kind of aware. It's like when the negative voice in my head, and this is what I was going to talk about with the brain. I mean, the brain is such a trickster. Is like, I have really got to a point when I have a negative or a doubtful or a fear-based thought, I just really identify with that. That's not me or who I am truly. That's my conditioning. And I'm not going to let my energy focus on those thoughts. They're still there. I have them. I have a plethora of them. But what I attempt to do is to understand that there really is these two parts of my thinking. One is very negative and dark and fear-based. And you know, and if we understand how the brain works, you know, and the other one isn't. The other one is about light and positivity. And when you were on that couch, you know where you were stuck. And at some point when you picked up those planks and you started to consciously, and you didn't have the bridge analogy in your head, nor did I, but the idea of, you know, understanding awareness, taking responsibility, forgiving yourself for all the crap and shit. And well, what I found interesting was, it's not that it stopped. Even though I was aware, even though I was conscious, even though I'd forgiven, I was still doing the same shit. And I had to keep catching myself, and I had to keep going back, and I had to keep. So it was like I take one step, one plank down, two planks off. One plank down, two planks off, right?
I want people to understand what this bridge really looks like. It's not like the Golden Gate Bridge with these like massive, you know, commercial steel pillars. This is one of those like Indiana Jones, like ropes on both sides. The planks are breaking as you're walking. You're gonna fall through. Try and climb. You know what I mean? It's
The bad guys on the other side chopping at it.
Absolutely.
There's machine guns going on. You're having a dump.
100%. It is not a really beautiful, like, oh, let's just have a, this isn't the bridges of Madison County. This is like Indiana Jones. It's intense for sure. It's important for people to know that.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. Well, it's actually, again, because we didn't know where we were going to go today on this conversation, it's such a breath of fresh air to be able to even articulate it with somebody that understands it, and even that imagery of, the idea of Indiana Jones, because, if I look at that character, if we say, what is the attributes of that character? That character is fighting for good, preserving, Indiana Jones preserves something that's so important, and people are trying to steal it. It's always something that, it's the Holy Grail or whatever it is. There are bad people trying to steal it. Now, with our life, I think our identity is stolen, not necessarily by bad people, but our interpretation of people's actions. Like we said, whether it's the kid, and you go back to the cupcake and you think, oh my God, something so simple that we determine means that, oh, I'm fat and no one loves me because I can't do that. Or a parent saying, this happens a lot when the people who've lost their voices, hey, stop making so much noise. Hey, kids should be seen and not heard. Oh, whatever, all these kind of messages that we're given that we interpret, and then we make up this storyline. So I do love the idea of the Indiana Jones bridge. And I love the idea that, we are fighting for something to preserve something that's so beautiful, but it's going to take courage. It's going to take consistent action. It's going to take, these different, again, I'm going to hand over to you because I'm babbling here, but do you know what I'm saying? That what we're fighting for is our identity of who we truly are, not who we've made ourselves up to be, right?
Yeah, and I think the fascinating thing, and this was when I learned this, it was kind of like this, it was this miraculous, like, oh my God moment. And you mentioned it, you said our brains have these two parts, right? Like there's the fear-based dark parts, then there's like the light, optimistic, whatever parts. And that was a big thing for me, was when I realized, or I was taught that, there's our shadow side and then there's our light side. And that it's two sides of the same coin. And what I mean by that is when I learned that, a lot of people look at me now and they go, you're so confident. And what I help them understand is it's just the light side of my arrogance, my shadow side. That's all it is. Yeah. That's all my confidence is. My confidence is simply just the light side of my arrogance. And they say, well, you come across as extremely humble. And I say, my humility is really just the light side of my insecurity. You know what I mean? And how that used to get projected out. And so I think when people start to recognize, wait a minute, if there are these polarities, if I'm showing up as insecure, then what is that really a reflection of? What's on the other side of that? So if I can choose into insecurity, can't I also then choose into having a high self-esteem? If I'm choosing into, a negative thinking space, doesn't that also mean I could choose into a positive thinking space? And I think when we learn to kind of dance with our darkness, to dance with that shadow of who we've been, that's where the permission comes from. And that's where, I feel so comfortable, and Eden's brilliant at this as well, just being in complete ownership of who I've been in my life. On our very first date, I literally sat down with her on our very first date and I said, here's who I've been, here are the mistakes that I've made, here's the money that I've lost, here are the businesses that have crumbled, here are the relationships I've been in, all of it. I said, here's who I'm becoming in the process because of those things. And I think when we're willing to really dance with that darkness, to take an embrace of kind of that who we've been, then I look back on my life, and I've written this before, where I really look at my life and I say, it's my scars that make my canvas a masterpiece. It's my scars that I'm most proud of. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I was living on my mom's couch dead broke. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I, used drugs to cope. I'm not ashamed of any of those things. They were fundamental in the creation of who I've become. They're just the opposite side of the coin. Same person. It's just a new choosing into.
Yeah. And I think that's why people relate. And I'm going to use us as an example of that. I think I relate to people's imperfection. I say that. And I love the scar analogy, because again, Indiana Jones has lots of scars, right? He's been shot at, he's been cut, right? But if we use that analogy along the line, I mean, it is I always say if I hadn't gone through, I wouldn't go back and change. I wouldn't want to go back to my childhood and make it different. I wouldn't want the abuse and all the crap we went through. I wouldn't want to change it because I believe that, my compassion and my empathy and my understanding and my tolerance and my even giggling, giggling at things that, even happened yesterday where somebody almost hit my car, and they just did a dumb move, and you could see it in their face, and I was like, I just start to laugh and give them a thumbs up, and because I just put myself, I thought, oh my God, I've done that so many times, that stupid move, I've done it so many times, and I can just, so I even if we come down to those things, but I do find that that even today when I make mistakes, I kind of got to a point, and touching on 60 now, got to a point where I know that in a year or 6 months or 3 years, I'm going to look back on this and there's going to be a reason that I can embrace. And so I get through things a lot faster, where in the old days, it may take me years. Now I can catch myself and I can navigate it so quickly because I do know what's coming. I know that with that awareness, I actually see that what I'm doing, that I'm gonna either tell a story about it or I'm gonna make a post about it. And so many people are like, oh my God, I feel this way. So I just go with I think the human scars, and maybe that's what we should call them. You said scars, but the scars of humanity are beautiful because of the very nature of the scar itself. It's, it's the, how we got the scar, but it's wearing it with pride to say, yeah, I went through this battle and here I am. I'm still standing, right?
So that reminds me to go back to the couch, because you asked what else helped in the transformation and some of those steps. And one of the things, because you just reminded me of it, in that you said, you still make mistakes, but you just understand now inherently much more quickly to release the mistake because it's going to benefit down the road in some way, shape, or form. And so as I started to kind of heal and whatnot, some of the questions I started asking myself changed as well. So I would ask myself questions like, what's the gift in this?
Yeah.
What's the gift in this? What kind of lesson am I meant to experience from having lived this part of my life? What else is possible, right? But the thing I didn't do, and this is really key for a lot of people, I think, is I didn't attach to trying to find an answer in the moment. Yeah. I simply just facilitated the question. So I created space for something to come in. And to this day, there are moments where I'll have a new experience and go, oh, so, okay, got it.
You're talking about sort of having an experience today and maybe identifying something that happened 2 years ago. I was like,
I'll give a perfect example. So going back to my ex when we split. So I knew things were really rocky between us. I came home from a personal development seminar and I said, look, I don't think that you're ever going to feel safe with me as a man. She came from a very blue collar family, paycheck to paycheck, nothing wrong with that by any means. But I'm always going to be an entrepreneur, a risk taker. You're never going to feel safe with me, at least not until I quote unquote make it. And I said, and I don't think that you're the right woman for me. I think we both know that we've been lying for a couple of years here. I said, so if you need to go, then you should go. And she left. And even though I had basically facilitated her leaving, I still blamed her. And I was very, very angry. And I couldn't quite understand how she could just leave so easily. There was no fight in her. There was great. U-Haul was packed up.
Oh, it's interesting. Sorry, I don't want you to lose this, but interesting that you've got that idea of, do this. But secretly, you're wanting her to prove to you how much you mean to her. So by her doing it, it's like she's now a bitch because, right? Oh, yeah. That's how crazy our minds are, right?
We're psychopaths. All of us are crazy. All of us. I tell people all the time, we're all crazy. It's just some of us learn how to manage it a little bit better than others. That's it. Right? We're all batshit crazy. Because there was that wound, right? That like, oh, okay, so she really doesn't love me and all this shame and blah, 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 blah. Now, so this is what I mean by allowing lessons to play out later in life. So almost 4 years later, I had moved to Utah. I was back in business with a guy who was like a brother to me, close friend. Turns out he'd been working these like all hours of the night. I mean, he'd put in these like, binge sessions, working 17, 18 hours, be up till 3, 4 in the morning. And I couldn't quite figure out how he was doing it. It turned out that he was doing it with the help of meth. And that was not an okay thing for me. but it got real dark real fast. He ended up impregnating our secretary or assistant, excuse me, at the time. He ended up getting in trouble with the police. And so he called me one day and said, hey, the police are looking for me. I pushed Sarah, who was his wife at the time. And I said, we're going to turn you in. I said, I'm going to turn you in. I said, I'm not going to, enable you to be a fugitive. You're going to turn yourself in. You're going to pay the price, whatever the consequences are. And he said, okay. So I turned him in, and I went to his arraignment 2 days later. We took him to his arraignment after I bailed him out. And when we got back to his house after court, my bags has already been packed. And I looked him in the eye and I said, I love you, but I have to go. It's not safe for me here. Clearly, based on results, our relationship isn't working. Please get sober. Please get help. Please go clean up your life. But I can't be the person that carries you through this. I can't. It's just not safe or healthy for me. And so I'm leaving Utah and I'm driving, and I'll remember the moment. I go, oh my God. And I pick up the phone. And I call my ex and I say, hey, it's me. And she goes, what do you want? I say, please just listen. You're probably not going to understand this. I don't expect you to. You don't need to say anything in response to what I'm about to share with you. But I just wanted to thank you. And she said, for what? I said, I wanted to thank you for modeling to me what it looked like to have the courage to saying yes to yourself and getting yourself out of what was a very unhealthy and unsafe environment. Thank you for demonstrating that to me in my life so that I had the ability to do it years down the road. So there was this massive coming together, right? This closing loop of, wow, what I'd experienced in the past with her leaving was really just this modeling of what it takes to have the courage to leave an environment that's just not safe and not healthy.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's so great. It's a great analogy. And I think because we're going to have to call this. Yeah. What I was thinking is we could do this one. You and I could just do a conversation, because I just thought for me, how great it is just to chat. And, again, with no plan where the hell we were going, but where we got to is I think so important for people and for us. I still feel like I'm on the bridge sometimes. It's not like that I've arrived. I'm on the bridge for different sets of reasons or different parts of my life. It's not like there's one bridge. It's like but one thing you said there, which, the idea of this realization and this ability to phone her and acknowledge the lesson from back then. I think a lot of people can't see that when they're angry and when they're blaming. And so I found for me, when I stopped blaming the world and I stopped being angry at everybody else, and when I started to take that responsibility piece for me, that's when I could see what you saw. When you were only able to join those dots, because the other way to join those two dots is like, that's another one who did it. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Even though you were doing it, you could have easily blamed him for his drugs and this and that, and not had any correlation between the two things. And if you think back to your life, you were able to see clearly that, oh my God, this is what she did, and build a new bridge with her. But I just love the idea that, and I know some people right now, anger, blame, all of different energies that are standing in the way of you and that bridge. Because it's, I would say, and you can help me out here, I think it's impossible to jump on that bridge when you're hating or blaming or angry at the world. I just don't think you can see it, because everyone else is wrong. And the bridge can't, in fact, there is an Indiana, let's use that analogy one last time. There's an Indiana Jones part where he has to walk across this invisible bridge. He has to trust it's there. Do you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I got goosebumps on this one, right? That's what it's like. It's almost like, there has to be this blind faith that when you take that step, like when you phoned her, she could have told you you're an asshole and hung up.
Oh, she did.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it was really something like that. It was something along the lines of, okay, that's great. Like, I still don't like you. Great. Okay, have a good life. Cool.
Okay, good. Right. But what I'm saying is you didn't get that any more meaning, right? That wasn't like something that it didn't put you back behind your mask, right? Anyway, so let's wrap this up. What's your takeaway? We had this conversation. What's something, when someone watching right now, what's some, you know, what do you want to leave people with? Or is there something you can share that would maybe give them something to contemplate on, or maybe some work they could do personally that would allow them to maybe get to where, you know, they really want to go? Because I think people watch this stuff because they're looking as well, right?
Yeah. I think that there is, when it comes to building anything, you need tools. And I think that what I found in my life is that essentially the Swiss Army knife of tools is it's a 3-part knife that would help you build this bridge. And it's really compassion, forgiveness, and gratitude. And if you're willing to dive into those 3 things and have them at the forefront of every choice that you make, then life becomes a lot simpler, and you lay down those planks with a lot more stability. And so, like you were talking about with the, you know, this holding on to like anger or getting frustrated, or the guy that cuts you off on the freeway, something I've learned to ask myself, and it's a really simple way to move to compassion and forgiveness and into gratitude, is I just ask myself the question, when have I ever?
Well, what?
When have I ever?
Oh, yeah.
It's so simple. Like, so when somebody, like, if someone lies to me, right? When have I ever lied? Oh, plenty of times, right? So I have compassion. I can empathize with why they might have chosen to do that. I can immediately forgive them, and I can go to gratitude about whatever I want to. So really putting forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude at the forefront of your minds, and this incessant, obsessive desire to just let go of the rope. You know, just stop holding on to these things and these people that we've assigned meaning to, is really the foundational principles, I think, that lend themselves towards kind of those planks along the way.
Yeah. And I suppose the last thing is just, you know, there really isn't this arriving. There wasn't a moment I don't think you can think about, or I certainly can't, where like, I've arrived. I still feel that, well, actually, I wrote this quote in a comment. Someone commented yesterday on my post, and I wrote this quote. I said, you know, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. It's
That's
like,
one of my favorites.
What's that?
That's one of my favorites. I built a whole keynote around that last year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, for me, it's like the idea, it's not about arriving, it's the journey itself. And what I feel fortunate about, Zach, is I get to share this journey with you. And I love the fact that this has brought us back together, because, you know, we've been on different paths. We know we're always there. And we send these texts periodically just to say we love each other and say hi, or a message. You did something on my birthday, which I love so much. You said when people are important, that sending a text isn't good enough. So you wanted to make sure that you spoke and you left a message on, and all those things, they sit with me, even though, you know, I mean, and you got to know that those things lay in my heart, and they're very, very important. But the quality of the person you are and how you show up, and your willingness to come on and share this with me, I've enjoyed this so much, and I'm looking forward to the next time we get to play together. So thank you.
Well, no, I really, you've had such a significant impact on how I go about life and how I view things. And yeah, of course, from a training and speaking perspective, you've been fundamental in my growth, but observing you as a person, and I share this with people all the time. What I've learned from you so inherently is your ability to treat every single person that you meet, whether it's the janitor or the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, the exact same way, and your willingness to just kind of show up in people's lives and bring joy, because you know that you can either be as the saying goes, you can either be the thermostat or the thermometer in the room, and you're just great at, raising the temperature in people's lives. And I really I could never overstate the significant impact you've had in my life and in Eden's life as well. You've been there for some really difficult conversations with us early in our career, and you've really been a guiding light. And there's so many lessons that I take with me every single day, that you've imparted on me. So I just say I'm grateful for your friendship, and your mentorship would be an incredible understatement. And you're by far one of the most fun people to have drinks with and to tell probably, irresponsible and
that'll be the next time I drink will be with you. Hey, right. I love you, brother. Hey, kiss Eden for me, and we'll definitely see you all on the other side.